Okay, so welcome to Biology 101. My name is Michelle Miller, and I am the zoologist in the department, which means that I study animals. And then we have another person in our department named Sasha McKeon, and she studies plants and then microorganisms and fungi and that kind of stuff. So this is the first class in, it can be standalone, or you can decide to take the sequence, which is 101, 102, and 103. And so 101 kind of sets the groundwork for biology, the study of biology, by first addressing chemistry, a little bit of chemistry. And then we're going to start talking about cell biology. And then we're going to move on to genetics. And then we finish off the course with evolution. So hopefully you are pretty familiar with Canvas, using Canvas. Has anybody like never logged on to the Canvas site yet? So the Canvas shells that you'll be able to find for hopefully, do the people that are on the wait list, you guys don't have access to the Canvas shells yet, do you? Do you know? I don't know. Okay, so we'll find that. I'll find out. So if you go to the Canvas shell, you'll be able to find the syllabus, which is what I handed out to you. And remember to make note that the class is 12:15 to 1:30, not 12 to 1:15. And then the textbook is also available through here. And the textbook is online and it's free. If you would like to have a printed version of it, you can go to the bookstore. And the bookstore has printed off a few, I believe. And you can buy that for like $15. So this is a textbook. Oops. Oh, geez. Something's not right. Okay, so this isn't my error. This is through OpenStax. Okay, so OpenStax, hopefully the textbook will be available there. I'll make sure after class. But OpenStax is a grant-funded group of people that got together and they decided that textbooks were too expensive. And so there is a push to have open educational resources that are free and online that anybody can use and modify to their own purposes. So I didn't actually write the textbook, but I kind of picked and chose from different aspects of what they had online. I put together modules, and so even though my name is on the book, I didn't write it. Okay, so I just kind of put everything together, and then for some reason they then put my name on it because I put everything together, or Sasha put everything together. I'm not sure which one of us did this one. So, so hopefully, hopefully you'll appreciate the fact that this is kind of saves you money. On the downside of it is it's not as really as good of a textbook as the fancy like McGraw-Hill or Pearson, those types of textbooks. But the one that I was using was like over $200. So I decided that that was just a waste of money because there's so much stuff online now. So I wouldn't say that this is like the best book, but it has all the basics in it. And then I encourage you to, if you're interested in something more, or if you don't understand the textbook or it doesn't seem complete to you, to do some researching on your own, because there's so many resources out there on the internet that are free and available for you. And you can ask me about them as well. Okay, so the textbook is not as good, but so that actually means that it is more important for you to come to class on a regular basis so that I can supplement the information that is in the textbook. And I am going to attempt to record the lectures. So right now I'm recording it, and it's going to be posted on a YouTube channel. And I will put the recorded videos under each week. And so you'll notice here that there's, on the home page, there's week 1, week 2, okay? So once I've recorded this video, hopefully successfully, I'll then put it linked here so you can review it. Or if you happen to miss class on that day, hopefully you'll be able to view it. And if for some reason there's technological failure, it always behooves you to find somebody in the class that can be your study buddy, and you can share notes back and forth, and you can study for the exams with that person or group of people. Okay, so you'll notice that on week 1, there are a couple of assignments that are due. And I would like you to access the Canvas website and do the practice homework. And I believe that's by Thursday, because it's the 5th, right? So that's yeah, Thursday. So the practice homework, there are questions there. The practice homework being practiced, as long as you attempt the little quiz, you'll get your full points. And so I'm just going to go back in after the week is over. And so even if you get 1 out of 5 correct, as long as you attempted it, I'll change that to 5 out of 5. So you don't have to worry about the grades on that. But you should try to learn something from it. The online homework is due Sunday at midnight. So each week, there's going to be an online homework that is due Sunday at midnight. And there's no way to make up those quizzes once they are over. They only make up a small percentage of your overall grade. But it's really important to kind of keep up and study on a regular basis. And so I'm hoping that that will encourage you to read the book. And those online quizzes are open book and open notes and open internet. So you could search any website for help with the answers. And then the introduction is just to give me a little bit of information about yourself. So I'm going to be taking attendance in lab today, because there are people on the wait list, and I want to make sure that if you come to lecture and you come to lab and you're on the wait list, that you are able to get into the class. Okay. Are there any questions about the online homework? So some people are like, 4th week, they're like, oh, I forgot all about the online homework. But by then it's too late to go back and do them. Okay. You'll also notice that if you look on the syllabus, I have some information about how to do well from 20 years of experience, right? So coming to class and just being and listening is a really good way to do well in this course. Okay? And then if you turn the page, we have under grading, the midterm and the final exams. So they are going to be given in class. So during regular class time, you're going to come in, and then during finals week, you'll come in for the final exam. But the midterm exam will be during regular class time, and it is closed book and closed notes. It is multiple choice and short answer essay questions. And then we also have in-class quizzes, because I have found that they are good practice for doing well on the midterm. So they're like little mini tests. And so our first in-class quiz will be next Monday. So next Monday, you'll have a little quiz over the information I present today and the information I present on Wednesday. So it'll only be over the lecture material, not over all the information in chapter 1 and chapter 2 of your book. So just these first two lectures. And then each week we have a quiz. And so it'll generally be on Monday to begin with. And then generally maybe something happens and we have a midterm, and then it maybe gets changed to Wednesday. But so those are worth 15 points, and they're just really good practice for doing well on the midterm. I found that the midterm exam scores have gone up since I've implemented having quizzes. I always hated quizzes or in-class quizzes, but it actually helps. We also have lab component, and the lab component of this class is about 25% of your grade. And so as long as you come to lab and participate in lab, you generally will do you'll do pretty well in the class. What you want to do is you want to have a lab notebook that is completely separate from your lectures. So you're going to be turning in your lab notebook to me twice, the 3rd week of class and at the end of the class. And you don't want to have your notes, your lecture notes, handed to me. So what I would recommend is getting a 3-ring binder and just putting a little bit of paper in it. You don't need a lot. And then you will get handouts in lab that you'll fill out, and then you'll put them in that binder, and then you'll turn them into me and I'll grade them. And that will be how you will get graded for the labs. Okay. We'll talk more about that today, which is lab is at 2. And then if you turn the page, you have the approximate point distribution for everything. And then some information about missed exams. You don't want to wait till after the midterm to let me know that you're not going to be here. You want to let me know ahead of time or as soon as possible if something happens that you can't make it at the last minute. And then there's some accommodation information that you can contact the wellness center or the person that's in charge of accommodations. Maybe extra time. That generally you probably know about that here if you need it. Okay, are there any questions about the syllabus? If you look on the very back page, I've included, and you might have seen these in other forms, but the 4 energy allies, which just really helps in not only in college classes, but also just everyday interactions. So to stay focused, those students or those people in your classes that are always off topic and dragging the class down and you're rolling your eyes, right? So you really want to stay focused and you want to kind of assume nothing. So you probably been in classes before where you're like, oh, I just know the instructor does not like me personally, right? Or something like that. So you want to kind of just let that go in this type of environment because we're all here to learn. And then always do your best. So I always assume that you are doing your best. And your best might be not an A, right? It might be not even passing, but I'm going to assume you're doing your best with the conditions that you have. So perhaps, you might be sick or you might have a full-time job and 4 kids or whatever it is. I always assume you're doing your best and I will try to help you do your best and pass the class. So just let me know if you need any help. The tentative schedule is here. So you'll notice that I have the labs listed and then the 2 lectures and then the chapter of the textbook that is associated with that particular lecture. And then the final exam is actually different. It's a little bit different. It's 1 to 3 on Wednesday at finals week. Are there any questions about the syllabus or the kind of the structure of the class? Okay, so the way that I lecture and present information is through the Starboard. So we're going to be taking notes. And the reason why I do this rather than PowerPoint or whatever where I hand you out the slides is that I actually think it helps if you write it down, right? So it actually helps to solidify things if it goes from your brain to your hand to your paper. Okay? And some people write really beautiful notes, and some people don't write really beautiful notes. But as long as it works for you when you're studying, that's what counts. Okay? So I'm not going to actually look at the notes. Uh-oh. Having said that, the pen is missing from the room. So I have this little board that I can write on. Oops, what happened there? Starboard. Oh, do I have to write with my finger today? Maybe. Okay, I should have checked on that. I'll just be right back. I might be able to track it down here. Did you just use your finger?
I did not use it at all.
Oh, we didn't use it. Oh, you didn't use this board? Okay. Okay, so normally I have a pen and I'll probably have really beautiful handwriting, but I don't today. Oh, there it is. Oh, thank you. Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay, I found it. It's in the basket with all the other pens. Okay. So the first thing we need to do in biology is to define kind of what it is that biology studies versus like chemistry and physics and geology. So we are obviously in bio. Bio means life. Ology means the study of life. So what do living things have in common with one another? What is something that some living things have in common? If you're going to complete this thing, living things do what? You want to grow, right? Okay. So in order for them to grow, they have to somehow get nutrients and energy from their environment, right? So we'll say that they must obtain nutrients and energy from their environment. Okay, so let's think about a plant. So it starts out as a seed, and it has a little bit of nutrients in it, but not a lot. So if you think about a tomato seed, when you plant it in the ground, after a while it starts to sprout, and then it turns into this huge, like sometimes these crazy, crazy tomato bushes that are everywhere, right? And they grow huge and kind of take over your whole garden. So where do they get, what nutrients do you think that they're getting? What are they getting? Their nutrients. Where are they getting their nutrients from? So soil, right? So if we look at plants, so example, plants. Okay, from a seed to a plant. Okay, so what kind of nutrients do they get from the soil? Minerals, like maybe calcium. I had tomatoes that had that rot blossom on them, you know, it's like where the blossom was, it turns brown on one end, so you have to cut it off. And somebody told me that that was a lack of calcium. But do calcium make up does that make up the majority of the plant? That's probably a really small part of the plant, right? So what else do they need besides calcium? Like if you're gonna add fertilizer, what is in fertilizer? What kind of nutrients are in fertilizer? Nitrogen. And we'll talk about this, but nitrogen is necessary for the production of proteins. Okay, what else? What else is in fertilizer? Does anybody know? Usually there's two numbers on a bag of fertilizer. So it's nitrogen to how much of phosphorus. Okay. Is that make up a big part of the plant? What else are they getting from the soil? Water. But if you took your tomato plant and you cut it down and you dehydrated it, there would be lots of biomass, right? What is the primary component of a plant? What is the primary, like if you were going to, what element are we based upon? Like if you're thinking about science fiction movies and they say, we are a blank-based organism. What element is found in our body? Carbon. Okay, so we are a carbon-based organism. Okay, so this is in the soil, right? But the majority of the mass of the plant is carbon. So where are they getting the carbon from? It's not from the soil. Air, right? So carbon. And this is from carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And carbon dioxide is a molecule that we breathe out, right? So we breathe out carbon dioxide, and its molecular formula is CO2. And what that means is that there's one carbon atom and two oxygen atoms. So this is kind of amazing if you think about it, because the mass of that tomato plant or the mass of the tree is being derived. The material is actually something we can't even see. It's all around us. It's something we can't see, but it's in the atmosphere, right? And that's an important part of the carbon cycle. Okay. So that's how plants obtain nutrients. And how do they get carbon from the atmosphere? What is that process of taking carbon from the atmosphere and making sugar? Nope. It's what plants do that animals don't do. Photosynthesis. Okay. So they use light energy, right, photo, to synthesize sugars. So if we were to look at that formula, right, it's actually 6 CO2s plus 6 H2O, that's water, plus light energy. And then that gives us C6H12. Oh, my pen's not working that well. This is C6H12O6. Okay. Six O2s. Okay. So that's carbon dioxide. This is water. This is sunlight. What is this? Sugar. What type of sugar does anybody know? Glucose. And then this is oxygen. Right? So plants are releasing oxygen. We use the oxygen in the Krebs cycle, in cellular respiration, to break down sugars in the presence of oxygen to produce energy. Okay? So the opposite of this is, we'll talk more about that, but that's cellular respiration. We don't do this. Only organisms that have chlorophyll are able to, and chloroplasts are able to capture carbon from the atmosphere. We have to eat our carbon, right? That's how we get it into our bodies to grow and reproduce. Okay, so we must grow. We must obtain nutrients and energy from our environment. The third thing here that I want to talk about that living things do, part of the energy that we have to obtain from our environment has to be used to maintain order. So we maintain order. So if you think about non-living things, if you think about your car, for example, if you take your car and you parked it in a vacant lot and you just let it sit there, is it going to stay nice and clean? Is it going to stay unbroken over time? No, right? So it is going to go to a state of disorder. Unless our cars will continue to go to a state of disorder unless we put energy into them, right? So in order for us to maintain this order, it takes energy. When we die, we start to decompose and our cells start to break down and everything will decay and go to disorder. So this idea is that things will automatically move towards being disordered, right? So let's put things move toward a state of disorder. This is a law, actually, like in physics, if you studied this is actually called entropy. Right? So entropy is a high state of entropy means a high disorder, right? And then we have to put energy into it to maintain order, okay? So must use energy to maintain order. So if you looked at your basal metabolic rate, so you can kind of sometimes measure that by when you're at rest, how much oxygen you require to just remain, we require so much energy and oxygen and ATP in order to just maintain our body If we're running, we're going to need more energy. If we're pregnant and we're growing or we're producing another organism, then we're going to take more energy for that. But we have to just have energy in order just to stay where we are. Okay. And I mentioned that we reproduce. So organisms can either reproduce asexually or sexually, and we'll talk about the difference between those. Most animals reproduce sexually, and it's believed that genetic variation that it comes about by combining the two genomes of parents is really important for our ability to survive, specifically our ability to survive like infections by microorganisms. Okay. Another characteristic of living things is that we must respond to the environment. So plants don't generally move, right? They have to stay in place. But even sunflowers, if you've ever seen sunflowers and noticed them, during the morning, they're facing one direction, and then you look out in the evening and they're turned and they're facing the other direction because they follow the pathway of the sun. So even plants respond to the stimuli of the sun, right? So we have to respond to the environment, and the environment could be responding to things that are not living, like sunlight and water and temperature, or it could be responding to living organisms, like our immune system responding to an infection, for example. And the last thing I want to talk about is living things have adaptations. So adaptations oftentimes is a little bit confusing because from a biological perspective, it's different from what is commonly used. So I could say, like, I adapted to the colder environment by wearing a coat, right? That's not biologically correct. Say that I acclimated by wearing a coat, but I did not adapt. My adaptations are genetic, so I inherited them. So my ability to sweat profusely when I am hot is an example of an adaptation. Okay, so adaptations can be defined as any trait. And so it could be an anatomy, so anatomical, so it could be a structure, it could be physiological, right? So it could be a chemical reaction that occurs in my body, like the ability to digest milk, physiological, okay? Or it could be behavioral, right? So our ability as humans to learn and to change, that is actually adaptation. Some birds, for example, have to learn their correct song at a specific period of their life. And so biologists have shown that if you give them nestlings the incorrect song, so you play it to them, they'll learn the bad song, they'll learn like the song that's not specific to them, and they will never be able to learn their correct song. So they'll be always singing the wrong song throughout their life, right? So that's a behavioral adaptation that works for them normally, unless we mess it up, right? But humans have our plasticity, our ability to change over time is an example of an adaptation. Also, like our four-chambered heart is an adaptation. Most of us have the ability to digest lactose, which would be a physiological adaptation. So those are important because they come about through evolution. So we know that organisms change over time. So that would be a good definition of evolution to use in this class. So organisms change over time. A good example of this is bacteria, because we now know that there are strains of bacteria that have become resistant to certain antibiotics, where before they were not. So they have changed over time. That's probably a physiological. They can survive in the presence of an antibiotic, and they're able to reproduce. So bacteria are also living because they have all of these characteristics. Okay, so I think that's pretty good. And these are kind of listed in your textbook as well, in chapter 1 of your textbook. So if you want to further review those characteristics. So this would be a really good question for that first quiz on Monday, a little essay question for you. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit more about energy, because we are going to be talking about molecules and cells and the use of energy. And so energy is the ability to do work. And that work could be mechanical, so my ability to move my muscles, and as an animal, I can move towards my food, right? So that could be an example of energy. I could also use my cells need energy in order to maintain their internal environment, so they would use that energy as well, okay? So there's two different types of, well, actually there's many different types of energy, but there's two different categories of energy. So we have potential energy and kinetic. And does anybody know the difference between these two? What is the difference between potential, what's an example of potential energy versus kinetic energy? One of these forms of energy is stored. Which one do you think, which word do you think? Potential, okay. So this is stored energy. And kinetic is energy doing work. I have to practice with this pen. Doing work. Okay. So a good example of stored energy is fat. Okay, maybe if I go like this. That helps. Okay. So we actually store energy as fats, and as mammals, we store it underneath our skin. In some fat is underneath our skin, so it's said to be subcutaneous. And why do we store fat underneath our skin? Does anybody know? Well, and it protects us from what? What is it keeping? So like, if you look at snakes, snakes do not have fat underneath their skin. If you look at whales, they have like a huge layer of blubber. So what's the difference between a whale and a snake? They are generally bigger, but there is something more fundamental.
The outside sources because it would keep your internal organs warm or cold.
Yes, right? So our fat, our subcutaneous fat, is insulation, right? So we insulate our body. So a whale is not a fish, right? A whale is a mammal. So it's warm-blooded, right? It's endothermic. And so it would be constantly losing heat to the water if it didn't have this huge layer of blubber, right? But under times of like famine, we can then use that fat as energy. So we could then start to break it down, right? And use it as energy. So an example of kinetic energy would be muscle movement. Now, there is a form of energy that's used specifically by muscles to contract, And this is called ATP. So I'll put ATP up here. And we'll talk about what ATP stands for, right? But this is the common energy currency. So fat can be turned into ATP. And then ATP can be used anywhere in the body. Now, the one thing about energy that is interesting is that if you convert it from one form to the other, the transformation is inefficient, and you lose energy in the form of heat, okay? So if I go from ATP, which is chemical energy, stored chemical energy, and then I go to muscle movements, right? This is mechanical energy. Those are two different types of energy. And so this is like a transformation, right? To go from chemical to mechanical. This is inefficient, and we lose energy as heat, right? So this is why when you're working out, you get hot, right? And you start to sweat. This is not an adaptation. This is a physical property. This is like physical law, that when you convert from one, I think it's the second law of thermodynamics, when you convert from one form of energy to another, you lose it as heat, right? So we try to overcome this physical law to help us retain heat or get rid of heat. So if we're retaining heat, sometimes when we're cold, we shiver, and that actually produces heat to elevate our body. And if we're too hot, we sweat in order to get rid of excess heat, okay? So that would be an energy transformation. So I would say the energy transformation is inefficient. Okay, so this actually can relate from the physical body, right? We can actually talk about how this is important from an ecosystem point of view. So I'm going to try to bring up ecology, a little bit of ecology on a regular basis, so that you can kind of go from cells and individuals to communities and populations and ecosystems, right? So when we look at it from an ecosystem point of view, you can see that there is a ton of heat being lost, right? So even solar energy being taken up by the plants, that is released as heat. So they can't even actually take in all of the energy that hits their leaves, right? Some of the ones that they do, they have photosynthesis releases heat, right? The rabbit eats the food, right? But he also releases heat to the environment as he, grows and develops and moves around. And then, so you notice that there's lots of transformations of energy as you go from one organism to another, but notice that heat is lost on a regular basis. So this is the reason why we get what are called ecological pyramids. So we have ecological pyramids. And these describe the amount of stored chemical energy at each level of an ecosystem, or each level, level of, we'll put community, actually, it's community. So community would just be a group of species interacting. So a pyramid means that the base is bigger than the top. So at the base, we would have a big base here, right? So at the base, we have those organisms that are photosynthetic. So this would be in a terrestrial ecosystem, these would be the plants. And then at the next level, the biomass that is in the next level has to be smaller based upon that law of losing energy as heat, right? So this could be like rabbits. And then we could have here, we could have hawks, right? So rabbits in a community are herbivores, they eat plants. Hawks would be carnivores, right? So the interesting thing here is that if you looked at all of the hawks in the world, right, and if we're in a community, there has to be a much greater biomass at the level at which they feed, right? So this wouldn't just include rabbits, this would include mice, field mice, voles, you know, everything that they eat, right? But that's at a greater biomass, right, than the plants. And so an aquatic version is really interesting. So in an aquatic ecosystem, and this is not from your book. Oops. Oh dear, okay, so, okay. So this is from a website, but here you see have like an aquatic organism, this would be like the algae, okay? This would be what feeds on the algae. So those would be the herbivores. And then as we move up, we have the carnivores, and we even have carnivores that are secondary carnivores that feed upon the primary carnivores. And so an example of this that I like to use is, you might want to write this one down. So you have the algae at the bottom, right? We have sardines. Actually, not sardines, sorry. We'll put zooplankton. Sorry. Sardines is up there, but it's not next. Okay, it is here. Sardines, tuna, dolphins. Okay. So this would be like the amount of algae. This gets light, right? Captures carbon dioxide in the water and produces biomass. This would be zooplankton. So zooplankton are little tiny little microscopic shrimp-type organisms. They're crustaceans. They are eaten by sardines. And sardines, you might have eaten sardines on your pizza, right? Sardines are little tiny fish, okay? Tuna eat the sardines. But the sardines, the mass of this level has to be much greater than the tuna. And then the dolphin eats the tuna. We also compete for access to tuna with the dolphins. So what is it when you buy tuna and you're looking at the cans, what do they sometimes say about the tuna? You're trying to figure out what tuna you want to buy, and you're reading the cans, and it'll say in big letters. What will it say? Albacore, well, that's a type of tuna, but it'll have something specific about the ecology or how dolphins safe, right? So in the past, what we did is we found pods of dolphins, I think they're called pods, and we put a net around the dolphins and we caught their tuna. So essentially we just followed the dolphins around because we were competing for the same food, right? So we would just throw nets around the whole thing and the dolphins would get in the net and they would end up dying, but we would get the tuna, right? So now what they do is that instead of putting nets around dolphin pods, they put nets around floating objects where they think that the tuna will be, but they still catch a lot of organisms that they don't want to catch. And so the bycatch, the stuff that they throw away when we're just trying to get tuna, is quite large. You'll see that. Okay, any questions about this idea of the pyramid? This is grams per meter squared, so that's matter. This is material, this is biomass. Okay. Okay, so when we talk about matter in biology, it's a little bit different than chemistry. So I'm just going to give you the biological definition that we go by. And this is anything that has mass. And we kind of estimate mass by weight. Okay, so this is matter. Takes up space, it has mass, it has weight. Now, when we look at the types of matter that we have on this planet, we can describe what are called elements. Okay, so we used to have it, but if you've seen a periodical chart of the elements, those are all of the known elements, not necessarily all found on the planet Earth, but the periodic table shows the different types of elements, and the elements are composed of atoms of all the same type of atom, of all the same type of atom. Okay. So for example, we have carbon. So carbon is an element that is composed of all the same atoms, and so we also have carbon, what we call carbon atoms, right? Now, when we look at the types of elements that are found in living things, they are carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur. And I put them down in this order because it provides a really nice acronym or mnemonic device. So it's schnapps, okay? Not like the liqueur, right? But it's spelled schnapps. And you'll see this written in biology text a lot, right? So those are the elements that make up the most of our mass in living organisms. Obviously, we have iron, we have calcium, right? But this is just the main elements. Now, these elements can be confined or combined to form molecules. Okay. These are atoms that bind to one another. We'll talk about atomic bonds on Wednesday. Okay. So in biology, we kind of ignore compounds. So if you take in chemistry, you're like, what's the difference between a molecule and a compound? And in biology, there is no difference. In chemistry, they're really picky about that. So I'll say that a molecule, this is a molecule because it's 2 oxygen, right? That's a gas, that's oxygen that we breathe in, right? And then water. Does anybody know what this is? Sodium chloride, what is that? Salt, okay? So that is also a molecule. We have molecules that are organic. Does anybody know? I'll tell you, these are not organic. These are inorganic. So they are inorganic molecules, oxygen, water, and salt. So what makes a molecule inorganic versus organic? Does anybody know? What did we come back to? What are we made up of? What is that plant made up of? Carbon, right? So organic molecules have a carbon skeleton. So we have chains of carbon molecules or rings of carbon molecules. Okay, so that's a carbon skeleton. So we have 4 categories of organic molecules. Okay. So for example, we have carbohydrates, which would be like sugars. We have proteins. We have fats or lipids, right? And we have what are called nucleic acids. So does anybody know which one of these is our genetic material? Since we're going to be talking a lot about genetics. Which category makes up our genetic material? Not protein, big guess though. Everybody thought it was protein. Nucleic acids, because what is our genetic material? What's the abbreviation for it? DNA, right? So nucleic acid, it's called actually deoxyribonucleic acid is our genetic material, okay? So the thing about these organic molecules is that they're found in living things, but these are not alive, right? So these are not living. Proteins are not alive. They do not have those characteristics that we listed, right? Sugars, DNA is not living. So what does it mean when you see something on a food container and it says live enzymes? What does that mean? Which enzymes would be what? What do you think? Which category are most enzymes? Proteins. And they say live enzymes, and you're thinking, but my teacher said that enzymes are not alive. What do they mean? You know? Means that they're active, that they work, right? So an active enzyme can break something down. So if you get raw milk, unpasteurized milk, which I don't think you can get at an Oregon, you could go up to Andy's, right, and buy raw milk, right? Bring it back down to Pendleton. And it has enzymes in it that will help you to digest it, right? So it has active enzymes, right? So when they say living enzymes, what they mean is active enzymes. Right? They're able to do their work. So organic molecules come together and they form what are called cells. Right? So this is the next level of organization, would be the cellular level. Right? So the interesting thing about cells today is that all cells today come from pre-existing cells. This is not how it had to happen 4 billion years ago when the first cells came about. So what they think is that our atmosphere and the conditions on the planet were very, very different 3-4 billion years ago. And cells did spontaneously arise. They had to at some point. Okay? But if you look at it today, things do not come from nowhere. And this was a big deal when they came up with this law. Essentially, it's a scientific theory, but it's actually a kind of a biological law. Because if you think about it, the test was they would see rotting meat, right? And what they thought was happening is that the microorganisms were just spontaneously arising on the meat, and they didn't come from someplace else. But now we know when you see, if you leave something out, it will rot, and that has to do with maybe bacteria or fungi coming and breaking it down, right? So all cells today come from pre-existing cells. So that means that you could trace your cells in your body back to the egg and the sperm of your parents, back to the egg and the sperm of their parents, right? You chase the cell all the way back. And that has to do, or is really important for this idea that living organisms have unity, right? Because we all have a lineage, we have an ancestral line of cells that have been passed from generation to generation, and here we are. Okay. that make sense to everybody about that? Okay. So this is the unit of life. Okay. So this is the basic unit of life. We can say that there are some organisms are unicellular. So we have unicellular versus multicellular organisms. So for example, bacteria and amoeba and euglena, those are all examples of organisms that are a single cell, which means that a single cell does everything that we said it had to do. It gives energy, it reproduces, it grows, but it's just a single cell. And then we have multicellular organisms like plants and animals and fungi, right? That are composed of many, many different types of cells that all cooperate with one another to allow the egg and the sperm, respectively males and females, to be produced, right? So my body is, all these cells are cooperating and they are going to die with me. They are not immortal, but if I had an egg that was then fertilized by a sperm and I produced an offspring, that cell would have gotten passed on to the next generation, right? But if you think about it, it's quite amazing that our cells cooperate as well as they do, right? That cancer actually doesn't arise more commonly, where cells try to just reproduce on their own to the detriment of the whole organism. So this has to do with the biological hierarchy. So if we look at this level of organization, so in your book, this is the biological hierarchy. It's a biological hierarchy of organization. Okay. I should say biological. Okay. So we talked about atoms and molecules. We can skip the organelles for right now. We're going to talk about what those organelles are. Cells. Okay. I am made up of cells that then form into tissues. So if I'm thinking about nervous tissue, that nervous tissue then creates the brain, right? So we have the organ level, and then I have the higher levels of the organism that's capable of reproducing. Populations are groups of organisms, and then communities are groups of different species of organisms interacting. Okay, oops. This should have one more level. So I believe that there are, on this week's, won't go there. On this week's quiz in your homework, you'll need to reference this diagram in your book, okay? So this is the hierarchy of biological organization. So you need to know, and you'll have to answer some questions about the order of it. Okay. Okay, so systems biology is a new way of, or kind of it's actually a new discipline within biology, but it looks at a holistic approach. Versus a reductionistic reproach, reductionistic. So specifically in Western science, it's a little bit different when you look at like Eastern and Chinese, you know, the way that they view the body. But in Western science, what we have done in order to understand how our body works is we break it down into really small pieces, and then we study those pieces, and we hope that it will give us information about the whole organism, right? So a good example of this is studying the digestive system and the circulatory system and the immune system as all being separate. And in the Western world, if you have digestive problems, you go to a gastroenterologist. If you have endocrine problems, you go to an endocrinologist. You know, if you have heart problems, you go to a cardiologist. And so we have these disciplines. And so what we're trying to do now with systems biology is kind of put everything back together to understand how we have interactions between the different pieces, okay? So we look at the interactions between the parts. So when we look at these interactions, we get what are called emergent properties. And emergent properties only show up after the interaction. They cannot be explained by the individual components, right? So these cannot be explained by the individual components. So a good example is just the difference between organic molecules and cells. So if we were going to understand how cells are live, we couldn't just look at proteins and carbohydrates and amino acids or nucleic acids and understand, because life itself is an emergent property. So you put all those molecules together and then voila, you have life, right? Same thing with the mind. When we study the individual neurons and how they're connected, we can't understand consciousness, because consciousness is an emergent property that cannot be explained simply by looking at the individual nerve cells, right? And so the important thing is the interaction between the parts. And ecology is a relatively young science, right? It was founded like in the 1960s, formally as a science separate from the other ones. And ecology is the study of how organisms interact with their environment. And it tends to be very complex. And it is a system of inputs and outputs, and it's kind of hard to make predictions because it can have lots of different inputs into the system. So I'm going to show you a short little video, and then we'll finish today. But this video talks about the rainforest and weather patterns. So generally, when we look at where the rainforest is, we say, oh, well, the rainforest tends to be in wet areas, right? But we don't understand how the trees actually interact with the weather to create those wet areas, okay? So we'll watch this is a 2-minute video. It's called Minute Earth. This is the website, and it goes really fast, so don't feel like your head is gonna explode. But I'll put this on Canvas in case you want to rewatch it.
A tropical rainforest without rain wouldn't be much of a rainforest. I mean, all plants need water to grow, and without it, they shrivel up and die. So what about the ancient Hawaiian proverb, Hahai no kapuha ika ula au, which means the rain follows after the forest? How could that be? Well, all land plants lose water when the pores on their leaves open up during photosynthesis, and this evaporation draws more water up through their stems. With so much rain soaking the soil in rainforests, water is nearly unlimited, and accordingly, rainforest trees can afford to move and lose more water than other plants. All that water vapor rising from the forest feeds moisture-laden clouds while also causing convection. Together, these effects accelerate the formation of rain, which falls to the soil and gets taken up all over again. This cycle of absorption, evaporation, and rain happens everywhere there are plants. However, super wet soil, fast-pumping trees, and hot tropical sun make the cycle so fast in the rainforest that unlike other biomes where clouds might form in one place and rain in another, in a rainforest, all that water stays in the same region. Without the forest pumping so much water into the air, rainforests wouldn't be as rainy. And without so much rain, the forest couldn't pump so much water into the air. So which came first, the rain or the rainforest? Well, before rainforests, ancestors of trees like cypress, pine, and spruce dominated the land, but they were conservative when it came to using and losing water, so the air tended to be dry, meaning less rain. However, around 130 million years ago, a new kind of plant developed that took the risk of losing more water in return for souped-up photosynthesis. These were the flowering plants, and their risk paid off. Their faster growth enabled them to outcompete the ancestral pines and take over the tropical regions of the globe. These angiosperms lost so much water into the air that as they spread, they brought their own rain with them. And today, tropical rainforests receive more rain than if they were pine forests. In some places, as much as 1 meter more rain each year. That's equivalent to an extra 2.5 hours of heavy rain each week. Not surprisingly, all that water cools off the forest too, which is why the Amazon isn't nearly as hot as the Sahara or even an East Texas pine forest in summer. But the hot, dry tropics of the past may soon be a part of our future. In parts of the Amazon where vast swaths of rainforest have been logged or cleared for agriculture, unusual droughts are already occurring, and forest fires have become more frequent. Scientists worry that these changes will lead to ever hotter, drier, and more flammable tropics in the coming decades, making things tougher both for the remaining forest and for the people who live there. So when in drought, plant a tree. Seriously, hahai no kapua I kapulula au. This episode of Minute Earth is supported in part by Cookie Blow.
Okay, so what was the emergent property there? What formed from the interaction? Well, there was, yeah, so the rain, what came about by the interaction between the clouds, or not the clouds, but the trees and the water? Evaporation, and then you had clouds formation. So I think that the pattern of cloud formation, so sometimes when you're in some tropics, like in, I went to Costa Rica this last summer, and so what would happen is it would be sunny during the early morning, and then by afternoon, it would start to cloud up, and then every afternoon, you would get this huge rainstorm, right? And so that pattern of precipitation is an emergent property based upon the trees and the interaction with their environment. And the trees were just releasing so much water that the clouds formed right over the forest and then rained back down. So that's a good example of the complexity of climate. Okay, so I know that was a lot today. Please read chapter 1 from your textbook. You can find it online. And we have lab at 2 o'clock. And so the lab is downstairs in ST 115. We can take a little break.